One of the most remarkable economic transformations in recent history has been the rise of China. Between 1980 and 2024, China's economy expanded more than 76 times. Massive new cities emerged, and hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of poverty. The period marked the greatest and fastest enhancement of living standards recorded in modern times. Let's take a step back. In the 1700s, economist Adam Smith regarded China as one of the wealthiest nations in history. However, following prolonged periods of war and instability in the 19th and early 20th centuries, China experienced a steep decline. Just a few decades ago, China was among the poorest countries globally. Today, it stands as an economic powerhouse, with economists forecasting that it will surpass the US as the world's largest economy in this decade. This transformation is often referred to as the Chinese miracle. Some describe this miracle as a straightforward free market success story. China was poor, then the economy was liberated from state control, and now China is rich. However, this narrative is misleading. China's ascent was not simply a victory for the free market. To understand this, we must examine the experiences of other countries that reformed their economies during the same period, often with disastrous results. Since the 1980s, free market policies have spread worldwide, leading many countries to liberalize prices, privatize industries, and embrace free trade. Yet many of these economies have stagnated or deteriorated. None have achieved growth comparable to China's. African countries endured brutal economic shrinkage. Latin America experienced 25 years of economic stagnation. When we compare China to Russia, the other major communist power of the 20th century, the contrast is even more striking. Under state socialism, Russia was an industrial powerhouse, while China remained predominantly an agrarian economy. However, during the same period that China's reforms spurred extraordinary economic growth, Russia's reforms resulted in a severe economic collapse. Both China and Russia had economies that were primarily directed by state commands. When Russian President Boris Yeltsin came to power, he abolished all price controls, privatized state-owned companies and assets, and immediately opened Russia to global trade. The result? Catastrophe. Shock therapy dealt a fatal blow to the Russian economy. While the shock therapists anticipated some short-term pain, they did not foresee the extent, severity, or permanence of the damage. Consumer prices soared uncontrollably, hyperinflation set in, government funds were plundered, and GDP plummeted by 40%. The shock therapy recession in Russia was significantly deeper and longer than the American Great Depression. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. Your support helps us keep bringing you great content. This was a disaster for ordinary Russian citizens. Rates of HIV infections, alcoholism, childhood malnutrition, and crime skyrocketed. Life expectancy for Russian men dropped by 7 years, an unprecedented decline for any industrialized nation during peacetime. Russia's experience demonstrated that achieving a successful free market overnight was impossible. Merely eliminating price controls and government employment did not lead to prosperity. Instead, it devastated the economy and resulted in the deaths of countless people, proving that the rapid implementation of free markets was not the straightforward solution it was thought to be. But what did China do differently? Let me explain. When Deng Xiaoping assumed leadership of China in 1978, the country was still desperately poor. In 1980, China had a per capita GDP of only $194, less than that of Sudan and Haiti, and almost half that of Nigeria. the Chinese leadership recognized the need for reform. Throughout the 1980s, they repeatedly considered implementing the same kind of abrupt reforms that Russia later pursued. The idea of starting from scratch was tempting, and shock therapy was widely endorsed by so-called scientific economics. Plans for rapid price liberalization were prepared and then withdrawn twice. Ultimately, they chose not to follow the shock therapy route. Unlike the free market economists in Russia, the Chinese leadership approached reform like a game of Jenga. Instead of toppling the Jenga tower, China opted for an experimental and gradual approach to reform. Market activities were tolerated or actively promoted in non-essential parts of the economy. China implemented a system of what they called dual-track pricing. State-owned enterprises and farmers had to deliver their quotas to the government at a certain price set by the government. But if they managed to produce more, they could sell their surplus at market prices. China was learning from the real story of the world's most developed nations, countries like the United States, Britain, Japan, and South Korea. Each of these, in their own way, managed and planned the development of their economies and markets, protecting early-stage industries and controlling investment. Western free market economists thought this system would be a disaster. The American economist Milton Friedman wrote an open letter to Deng's premier Zhao Ziyang. He said that the dual price system was a bad idea and that China should free prices and wages. But China's leaders didn't listen. And while Russia collapsed after following the shock therapy program, China saw remarkable success. The state kept control over the backbone of the industrial economy, as well as the ownership over land. As China grew into the new dynamics of its economy, state institutions were not degraded to fossils from the past, but were often the drivers at the frontier of new industries, protecting and guaranteeing their own growth. China today is not a free market economy in any sense of the word. The government effectively owns all land, and China leverages state ownership through market competition to steer the economy. The shock therapy approach advocated around the world was a failure. While Russia collapsed after its sudden transformation, China's gradual reforms allowed it to thrive, and that made all the difference. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update for more content like this. Your support means a lot to us. See you in the next video.